Gitu aja nggak apa-apa. Gitu kan masih ada lubang satu. Ya, udah cukup lah. Nanti kalau mati saya. Biar saya juga lihat.
Okay. Ready? Ready? Sudah? Ready? Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We would like to welcome all participants to enter the ballroom because we are about to start our first plenary session of the day. You may also bring your coffee and drinks and snacks inside if you'd like. But to maintain efficiency of time, we will begin today's plenary session, which will be by Ms. Alessandra Fagian and Mr. Fukunari Kimura. We will have Professor Dr. Chatur Sugianto, who will be moderating our discussion for this plenary session. So I welcome Professor Chatur to begin. Thank you very much.
Tes. Oke. Should I stand up? Okay. Okay. All right. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and also friends, welcome to the plenary session 1. My name is Chatur Sugianto, and I will be chair for the session. We are very honored because we have two distinguished speakers. First, we have Professor Alessandra Fagian. Hello.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And also we have Prof. Fukunari Kimura. Hello, Prof.
Yeah, thank you for calling me.
Thank you. Okay. Great. We have around 90 minutes for the session, so I will give 3 minutes to our speakers plus, and then 15 minutes question and answer right after the presentation. Okay. So let me start by introducing Prof. Fagian background. I hope I pronounce correctly. Prof. Fagian she is Professor of Applied Economics at Gran Sasso Science Institute, L'Aquila in Italy. He's regional economist, economic geography, migration, and also these are several of her main research. Actually, I have a long list of her publication, but just to name a few, she published in Applied Economics, Economy and Society, and to entertain you with her statistic, her citation is more than 3,000 for the last 5 years. So it's really great. Today, Prof. Fagian will share with us her current research and the geography of COVID-19 and the structure of rural economies, the case of Italy. Okay, without further ado, please, Prof. Fagian, the screen is yours. You have 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to thank the chair of the organizing committee, Professor Afifi, the president of the Indonesian Regional Science Association, Professor Yusuf, and all the Indonesian Regional Science Association. So thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today. So I'm going to share my screen right now. Just let me see if you can see the presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, it's clear.
Right.
Great.
Okay. as you said, introducing me, I currently work in Italy. I came back to my country after 17 years abroad. I spent most of my academic life, unfortunately, outside of my own country, in the UK and then in the US. And then I decided 5 years ago to come back to these new doctoral schools, which is located near Rome, a city that you certainly know more than L'Aquila, which is a little bit smaller. Given the theme of the conference, I decided today to present a recent article that now actually has been published in the Journal of Regional Science on the geography of COVID-19 and the structure of local economies, talking in particular of the case I'm most familiar with, which is the case of Italy. However, in the last few months, at least in Europe, there has been a growing sense of why do we still need to talk about COVID? We kind of felt like we were out of it until the recent wave of Omicron 5, which is actually currently striking Italy with a sharp increase in cases. But basically the idea of a lot of researchers and economists in Europe was that we have said a lot about COVID and economics. And in fact, if you actually go on Google right now, you can find over 617 million results when you Google COVID and economics, which is, by the way, a lot more that has ever been produced, let's say, on other topics such as the Great Recession, which was in 2009. And this is just in the space of a couple of years. So you can see how popular has been COVID also in economics. And so there was a little bit of a sense that there has been what we call the COVIDization of research, with many books coming out on the topic of economics and the COVID-19, but also I'm sure you are aware that there is now even a journal which is called COVID Economics, which is published in London by the Centre for Economic and Policy Research at the London School of Economics, which is on papers just on COVID. So there's been a growing sense of, are we overdoing it? Well, my answer is no, we are not overdoing it, because I think that COVID has been the biggest shock the world has experienced so far. And that is because it's different from the Great Recession, because not only it threatened the economy, but it threatened our lives. It was not just a matter of well-being and income. It wasn't an economic shock per se, but it was a health-related one. And people really did get scared around the world. First of all, in Italy, we were the first country hit in Europe, so it was pretty bad. And it changed our habits. So first we went through a series of restrictions, but also now we are realizing that the COVID gave us new opportunities. I'm really sorry I'm not there in Lombok with you today, because I know it's a very beautiful place. But doing this online is something that we were not used before, and now thanks to this new opportunity and the technologies that we are using more than before, I can actually do it virtually and being with you, even not being with you face to face. But it also made us rethink our way of living and values. So no doubt you have heard about the Great Resignation in the US. A similar phenomenon is starting here in Italy as well, where people are really rethinking their way of living and working. So for the foreseeable future, I don't think we will be able to write any paper, especially if we're using time series data, without considering this immense structural break that has been the COVID. The sentiment of Italians, and I'm sure of Europeans and around the world as well, is that we rebounded from COVID pretty quickly. So if you look into the resilience literature, there are different shapes of a shock. And the shock of COVID in Europe, in Italy, has been pretty much a V-shaped shock. So one shock from which the country rebounds back in, say, 12 to 18 months, okay? But despite this quick recovery, I'm really a bit shocked when people are saying that we are all going back to life as it was before, because this is certainly not true. I think that what COVID did was change consumer habits. So in all these surveys that you see and you find now on the web, where they are interviewing people and asking them, did COVID change your habits for good, a little bit, not at all? The majority of respondents are saying that their priorities, their shopping habits have been impacted by COVID-19. And 30%, almost 1 in 3 people, feel that they have totally a different set of priorities than they had in 2019 before COVID started. So for this reason, I think it's still important that we talk about COVID because there is so much we don't know about COVID yet. And in the meantime, we are entering another crisis, which is the Ukrainian war, or maybe 2 crises, because right now we also have this climate change that has always been there, but it's becoming more and more evident. And here in Italy right now, we have temperatures that we've never had in our history. So the next few years will be particularly complicated for us, for economists, for researchers, because we will be trying to make sense of these overlapping crises and how to disentangle them. It's going to be very different. Having premises this, I'm showing you what my contribution is today. Basically, what happened was that, I'm sure you know, but just very briefly, Italy was struck by COVID end of February 2020, March 2020. Now, it was a huge shock because we were the first country in Europe which was severely hit in a phase in which we knew nothing about COVID. We didn't know how to cure it. And so we had a lot of deaths. A lot, especially in some parts of the country. It was really scary because I don't know if you've seen any of these on the news. We had a high number of people that were dying and nothing that we could do about that. And basically all Europe was looking at the Italian case and then follow suit, trying to see what we were doing because maybe they could learn something from us, and they were all getting ready because they knew that after Italy, it would have been their turn. And so it was really something really scary. So as soon as COVID struck in March 2020, we started working on this paper right at the beginning. And we did that by collecting daily data on the cases that there were in that period and thinking about how and if the COVID crisis could be related to some kind of economic structure of the Italian economy. We did that because on the news, they were only talking about population density, right? So, okay, the north of Italy was struck more by COVID because of population density. Well, partially true, but there are a lot of places in the center or south of Italy, take Naples, for instance, where you also have a very high density of population. But despite that, they were not struck the same way by COVID. So if you actually look at the map of COVID in Italy at the beginning of, in first few weeks that it struck, so February, March, but even up until June, so the first wave of COVID, the intriguing fact was that COVID was very uneven subnationally. So on one side, you can say that it was a blessing that it struck the richest part of the country because we had better hospital. But even the richest part of the country couldn't handle the amount of cases that they had. So 80% of all the COVID cases in March were in the top 10 affected provinces in Italy. And these provinces were producing 1/5 of the overall national GDP. So 1/5 of the GDP was produced in these provinces that were really, really badly affected. And that, of course, created a huge problem for the whole of the Italian economy because we had to stop production in this part. On one side, this was bad. On the other, as I said before, because these were the richest region, these were also the region where we had the best health care structure. And so, you know, in a sense, if it happened in the south, possibly it would have been worse. But the point is, could it have happened in the south? So is the geography of COVID just connected to what the newspapers, the local news were saying? What I mean is the population density, or the geography of COVID is connected to the local economic structure? This is a very fundamental issue for policymakers, because if it's just population density, well, okay, you can do something about that, but if it's actually the economic structure, this has a policy relevance to target COVID and to have better containment measures. And of course, this was the first paper produced on the topic, and it has academic relevance for future research on the economic impact of COVID, also in other economies beyond the Italian economy. And so what we started thinking about, there were three of us, aside from collecting the data right from the start, was how can we proxy the local economic structure? What do we mean by local economic structure? All three of us being in regional economics, of course, we're very familiar with all the literature that talks about agglomerations economy, right? So we know that locations with economic activities that are characterized by a high geographical concentration benefit from these agglomeration economies, but they might be subject to more infections, right? So these increasing returns produce interdependencies, mostly based on face-to-face interaction, but these face-to-face interaction are the means, the vehicles to actually transmit also infectious diseases, as it was the case for COVID. So this intense physical interaction of people and commodities, right, might be an issue when you deal with a crisis which is a health crisis. So to speak, there started to be a mantra of social distancing here in Italy, in Europe as well, right? While we spent decades saying that the advantages of agglomeration had to be celebrated because spatial concentration had a lot of advantages, suddenly in 2020, everybody was saying you have to distance from people. Social distancing is the way to go. So of course, this was contradicting what was best for the economy. So I'm actually skipping through a few things because I know I have half an hour and then there will be discussion. So I want to jump into what we did, so the methodology and the results. And then if you want more details, I'll show you at the end the reference so you can read the full paper where you find a lot more details. But basically what we did was rather simple. We had all these daily data on infections, and we wanted to see whether these infections were correlated somehow to this spatial economic, local economic structure that we were measuring in a certain way. So our variable of interest was what we call the provincial economic base, which was a proxy of the local economic structure. And we did a special autoregressive model. Of course, being an infectious disease, we wanted to take into account also the spatial structure and possible spillover effects between the different provinces. So we had a W spatial weighting matrix, which was based on the inverse distance between all provinces. And then we had a vector of control variable and a set of fixed regional dummies to control for anything that we actually couldn't put in the model because we didn't have the data. The most important part of the model was our variable of interest, which was, as I said, this provincial economic base. What were we trying to capture with this index, basically, with this variable? We were trying to capture the spatiality of the local industry mix by first identifying the industry level concentration patterns, and then consider how relevant each of these industry with its own concentration was in the province that we were considering. So the formula of the economic base is as such, where the HHRK was the Herfindahl-Hirschman index of concentration of industries at 5-digit level, so very tiny sectors, let's say. Then we had we weighted this concentration index at industry level by the employment of that particular industry with that concentration in the province that we were looking at, right? And then instead of taking the mean to avoid a problem with extreme values, we decided to take the median for each province of this economic base. So again, dealing with space, right? The first thing you want to do is just to plot, to map your variable of interest with what you are trying to explain. And this is where we actually started realizing we might have been up to something, because an initial visual inspection showing on one side the cases of COVID-19 as of the 4th of March 2020, which is when we basically declare a national emergency. So the first case was on February 2020. We didn't expect COVID to run so quickly. It did. So on March 40th, we started with all the restrictions. We blocked everything, you know, mobility, anything. Only the essential services stayed open and everybody else was in lockdown at home. And that happened very quickly, as you can tell, 14 days, and we were completely blocked. So this was the number of COVID cases, the concentration of COVID cases on March 4th, 2020. And on the right side of this graph, you can see a map of our measure of the economic base in 2011. Of course, with a lag to avoid any kind of endogeneity, or at least make it less poignant. Okay, and so you can see that even by a visual inspection, there were striking similarities between what we wanted to explain and our variable of interest. In the model, of course, we had to control for population density, which is what everybody was talking about on the news. We also had to control for death in previous years, so in 2018, because there might be provinces that for some reasons, they have a higher percentage of death than other reasons, maybe because they have older population and whatever. So what we were actually looking at was in fact the excess death that was caused by COVID-19, not death per se, right? And of course, the COVID cases is a proxy of that, but at the same time, we know that not all the cases were recorded. So we had to control anyway for how the provinces looked before in terms of death. Then we also looked at health migration in 2016, so the number of days spent in other region hospital by each province residents, because in that period, for instance, there were cases that were moved from one region to another. Although the north was very rich and had a lot of infrastructure, at the very beginning there were cases that were moved from the north to the south because we simply didn't have any more space in the north. So we had to control for what normally was the health migration. Of course, we had to also look at demographics, such as the local share of elderly. Same thing I told you before, right? It was obvious that the mortality rate was much higher as you were getting older. So a province with a much higher share of elderly people, it was very likely to have higher share of death, and we had to control that. We also look at the share of male population in 2018, because at the beginning in 2020, when we wrote this paper, in Italy, it looked like the male death rate of COVID was actually slightly higher than the female death rate. And then we also looked at tourists, because at that point, you know, if somebody was coming from abroad, it was a problem because it could have taken cases from abroad, the unemployment rate, and so on. We also looked at the airport dummy, because initially the location of an airport was also connected to more cases, more COVID cases. Okay, so 20 minutes, so I still have a few minutes to finally present you the results. So these are the results of our baseline models. Okay, I will skip through the initial one. As you can see, we just added all the variables until we reached our final model where we had all the variables inside that I listed before. And what we found was that indeed the economic base was increasing, was associated with an increase in infection. So it was 36 cases, 0.53 increase in infection. Not a lot, but enough, because 36 cases were not little. Of course, what we then started doing, working on this baseline model, was doing a series of robustness checks to see whether this was just a fluke, this was just a result that came out from this particular model, or if this result was robust, to a series of checks that we did. The first thing we did was actually looking at the economic base, dividing manufacturing from services, because there is an idea that actually these face-to-face contacts might actually be more intense in manufacturing, where you can really substitute working in a specific location, a specific place, like you can, for instance, with services. And this is also another piece of work we are working on right now, is actually looking at the smart working, so remote working. And it's obvious that people in services can benefit from that much more than people in manufacturing, where they actually need to be and work in a specific location. Then we also looked at the deep lags in the provincial economic base. So we didn't go the length of actually building an instrumental variable models to have a perfect causation, but we actually tried at least to reduce the endogeneity problem by looking at deep lags. So we calculated the economic base in 1991. We also, as our variable of interest was the provincial economic structure, we also tried different measures of this structure, such as, for instance, the Krugman Index. We did find that even the Krugman Index was significant, but only at 10%. So the economic base, our index, let's say, performed better than this alternative measure. And then finally, this was something that also the referees asked us, we consider different time windows. So we started looking at the cases from the 4th of March, which was the beginning of COVID, and then the referees asked us to shift these windows according to the different lockdowns that we went through, but there was no difference in the main results. I just wanted to show you here the manufacturing and services results. As you can tell, the manufacturing is significant, not so much in services. So it does look like it's more a manufacturing story rather than a service story. When we looked at the Krugman Index, so the Krugman Index is a relative measure of specialization of provincial economies with respect to the national averages. So the national average, so lower values of the index indicate that the provincial economy is more similar to the national average. Higher values means that they're more dissimilar, thus implying that they're specialized in something, that they're more concentrated, say, than the nation. We did find a positive sign, although not as significant as the provincial economic base. So here is when we are actually looking at early lockdown measure where we shifted the time window, but as you can see, there was not very much difference between these. We are now working. This was still the first wave because by the time actually we got this published and we submitted it, we only had the data up until the summer of 2020, so we couldn't actually test the new waves. I can tell you as a preview that now we are working also on the newer waves, and although they struck different regions first, the results are still similar because it looks like there is an equilibrium structure. And at the end, even if COVID strikes in different regions, it turns out that the concentration still goes up towards the north, where there are more, where there is more intense manufacturing activity. Again, we looked at the different later lockdown regime. As I said, we arrived up until June 15, and as you can tell, there is very little difference as we go through the months from April, well, starting, of course, March, but going to April, May, June, the index was still significant, and in fact, with slightly higher values. Same when we are actually trying to correct for endogeneity, or at least diminishing the issue, and we looked at the lag economic base, we obtained similar results, although for the later waves with a little bit less significance. But if you look at manufacturing, which is the strongest one, that results, it's pretty strong. Okay, so as I'm keeping track of my time and I only have 2 minutes left, let me just draw some conclusions from this, which is by no means the end of the story, in the sense that this was actually the beginning of the story. We found that indeed there is a positive relationship between the local economic structure, which we proxied by the economic base, and the incidence of COVID-19, at least in the first wave in the Italian case, which it's very much a core periphery pattern of the geography of COVID-19 based on the agglomeration economies. And this association was driven by the presence of spatially concentrated manufacturing activities rather than services. And so this could be due to the long time shifts, close vicinity and continuative interaction between a relatively large number of employees that are performing manufacturing tasks all in the same building, close to each other. Okay, so lots to do still. So now there are newer data in later waves. And also, most importantly, we are now studying how it's affecting or not affecting the preferences of people for location. So right now we have 2 papers. One was just published in the Structural Change and Economic Dynamics journal, in which we are using Facebook data to look at the mobility patterns of people during the lockdowns and after. And we are especially looking at the difference between mobility within the local labor market and mobility between local labor markets. And we actually find that, surprisingly, mobility between local labor markets, so long-range mobility, has less of an effect on the COVID cases than the intra-local labor market mobility. And we think it is because people pay less attention to the COVID restriction when they are just moving short distances. But when we cross a region, a province, or whatever, they actually do pay more attention to the COVID restrictions. And on the second point of the preferences of people, we now run a survey of 2,000 working age Italian. And we are asking them whether they were working, they had the possibility to work, to have some kind of smart work before, if they are now doing some percentage of smart work, and how is this affecting their location preferences, because there has been a tendency to actually move a little bit outside the center of the city, the core, and go and live in the fringes of the town, or even in kind of intermediate, more rural areas, because now you are decreasing the frequency with which you go to work. But this is only true, as I was saying, for services and not for manufacturing. So we are obtaining the opposite results that we were actually obtaining with this paper. There are differences, but the other way around. And thank you very much. This is the reference. If you want to have, of course, more details on the data or the models or whatever, all the robustness check, you'll find that in this article that was published last year, end of last year. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Professor Jian. Okay, so I would like to invite our audience who wants to entertain with the question. Okay, Prof. Budi. And okay.
Thank you very much. Alexandra, for an excellent presentation. My question is the following. One is that, so what is the policy implication on this paper? Are we suggesting that, services, developing services is better for resilient or else? So that's number one is that. Number two is manufacturing is too general in terms of policy development. What is it exactly within manufacturing that we would like to worry? It is about the spatial formation, meaning that there are several measurements on spatial formation that actually channeling the impact of manufacturing. And finally is, do you think that your case in Italy will be replicable for developing countries in which the manufacturing sector and services sector are having different characteristics than developed countries such as Italy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you take that question or?
Yes, thank you, because there are a series of questions in that, so I may be worried of forgetting some of them. First of all, thank you, Budi. Nice to see you, even though it was just from far away. All very interesting questions. So let's start from the policy implication, which was your first question. Well, the first policy implication is that now that we know the pandemics might happen, because, before it seemed like something that was very distant, and now we know that it might happen again. This idea that it's not just coming and going away, but it might be something that in the next few decades we might have to deal with again. Now we know, for instance, that we are exposing certain types of workers more than others to these conditions, right, to the pandemics. So the policy implication, you said, what's the difference between manufacturing and services? Well, right now we know that the people that are working in services are in a certain sense privileged, right? Maybe we knew that even before, but now we know that even further. And they are privileged for two reasons. First of all, they are the ones that can substitute face-to-face work with remote work, okay? And the second, it's because they're generally in less dense environment. Well, there are moments in which they are in very dense environment, but in general, they are less exposed than the people in manufacturing. What's the policy implication? Well, I guess not much will change, but if we could do that, if you were asking me, I would start rethinking whether it's a good idea to have everything so agglomerated. I'm working on the development of rural areas, and I'm not suggesting, like some Italian economists did, that we should relocate manufacturing from a very central place to a rural inner areas, because that's unfeasible. But maybe we can think about restructuring a little bit and take more advantage of the intermediate areas, which have a lot of potential. And I think that we are not, at least in Italy, for developing countries it might be different, but in Italy or in Europe in general, these intermediate places might have potential that maybe it's now time to exploit. And this would be my answer to your question. I don't know if I answered the second question. We might want to go back to that. In terms of whether I think that my results, our results, are applicable to developing countries, well, first of all, it's for you to test it. So if you have data, you can see whether this applies also to other contexts. But I think that some of our results, especially the differences between manufacturing and services, or the more general result that it's not just demographic, it's demographics and economics. So we had population density inside, but population density was not the whole story. And when in Italy they were talking about pandemics at the beginning, right, it looked like that was the whole story. It's because it's very dense and there's nothing else. Well, Naples is very dense, but didn't have the same issues that Milan had. So there is something population density is part of the story, of course, I'm not saying no, but there's something else, which is also the economic structure of the place. There was another question, I don't remember.
Would you like to reply? No? Okay, thank you, Prof. Fakian. Okay, next.
Yeah, thank you. The finding of your paper is that economic base positively correlated with the case of COVID-19 in your country. And you use this economic base index based on the provincial level, I think. Yeah. And I'm just thinking about, do you think that the internal structures of the cities, because these agglomerations tend to focus to locate in the cities, yeah. Do you think that the internal structures of this city, actually the process behind these positive correlations between the economic base and the case of COVID-19? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very good point, because we do look at this concentration, right? But there are a lot of other things we don't look at. And one is what you are saying. We are not looking at the spatial organization of, say, Milan versus Rome versus Naples, right? Whether there might be also a difference according to the spatial structure of the city. That will require a lot of work, even with territorial planners, to actually identify a set of measures and also some kind of clustering of Italian cities according to the shape that they have as well. This is one thing on the territory itself. The second thing is, but this is something we are working on right now, not all manufacturing industries and sectors are the same. And so in Italy, well, everywhere, there is a difference between essential manufacturing services and non-essential manufacturing services. And during the COVID, the non-essential ones were actually closed down, so they didn't have much of an effect on the COVID itself. The essential one, though, kept on going. So right now, what we are doing is reproducing some of our results, looking at the differences between essential and non-essential manufacturing. This is very important. And another thing that we are looking at now, there have been a lot of classification that came out of all the different industries where researchers have actually attributed an index, a value of the services according to the frequency of interactions, of face-to-face interactions. So now we know a lot more than we did in March 2020 about these two aspects of different industries, and we are working on refining the results, looking also at the different structure of the different industries in the cities.
Okay, would you like to replay? No? Okay, one more quick question. Let me take that question. Do you think, the migration, internal migration will also affect this structure of industry after the COVID?
I'm pretty sure it will, and because actually my main specialization is internal migration, we are already looking at it. I actually think that a lot of people right now are thinking of commuting more. So not so much in terms of migration per se, but I can see that the patterns of commuting are changing, at least in Italy, with people wanting larger houses, bigger garden, because they're so scared of being in lockdown again. We've been in lockdown for a very long time in Italy, the longest of all the European countries, because we were the first. And people got very claustrophobic, right? So now they want larger houses and they would rather commute longer distances but have this living space. So I think commuting is going to change.
Okay, great. Time is up, so let us give applause to Prof. Fajian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we turn to our second distinguished guest, Prof. Kimura. He's not the chief economist of the area. He's also a professor at the Faculty of Economics, Keio University, Japan. Prof. Kimura's experts in primary international trade and development economics, and also have a lot of list of publication. And in this session, Prof. Kimura will share with us on development strategies in large island economies, possible suggestion from empirical international trade. Prof. Kimura, you have 30 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank organizers for inviting me to these great opportunities, particularly Park Budi, Park Mansu, and the supporting staff did a lot for me. So thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Does this look okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the conference theme said small island economies, but if we look at Indonesia, it's not small islands, not only small islands, but we have large, big islands too. So from the viewpoint of an international trade economist, and also doing some for new economic geography, Indonesia is a very big country, and certainly politically, that's a great thing to be one country, of course. But when we talk about the industrial development, sometimes maybe some sort of findings and the lessons coming from international trade would be useful. That's what I'd like to talk about today. Location advantages and connectivity determine industrial location, basically. But of course, domestic economy and the international division of labor have a little bit more complicated relationship. So domestic can be lumpy. This is coming from a very old trade literature by Diadov. That is coming from the imperfect mobility of factors within a country. Actually, their paper was talking about China at that time. But actually it's still different from international economy, particularly on say macroeconomic policies, monetary, fiscal, exchange rates. Those are unified within a country. So that could be the source of Dutch disease and others. And also public investment may be sort of biased because of one country. And also labor mobility could be high compared with international. And also we have it's a home country effects. Say cross-border trade costs tend to be higher. And also we may have domestic tastes. But if you look at Indonesia, actually this is a geographically huge country with large islands, cities with million-plus population, and also at different development stages. So that is why I think international trade may provide some views on industrial development. So, and also, you talked about those kind of issues, but you can see sort of game changers that we have to look at right now. One is the physical connectivity. Actually, in the past 10 years, I think connectivity issues improved a lot in Indonesia, and is continuously improving. That would give us a sort of different views on that. And also digital technology changes many things. Then according to that, investment-related policies may change in order to think of regional development more seriously. So this is your familiar map of Indonesia. If we look at the population size of cities, and you can see many cities are above 1 million, and certainly it depends on how to set up the boundary of a city. but 1 million, above 1 million population means that the size of a capital city of small to medium-sized economies, and also thinking of the location or distance between cities. So you see the typical distance for manufacturing production networks. If you think of a just-in-time system in industrial agglomeration, that is usually 100 kilometers plus diameter, like Jakarta metropolitan area. And then we have a domestic production networks with ground transportation, usually up to 600 or 800 kilometers. Then we have, above that, we have international links with maritime and air transportation. This is more than 600 kilometers. So these are a sort of typical way to think of. But in case of Indonesia, you can see the physical distance between two cities, say Jakarta, Surabaya, 662. This is closer to the threshold between ground and air transportation in the case of passenger transportation. Jakarta, Medan, above 1,000. Jakarta, Makassar, above 1,000. Those are usually already sort of international distance. So in case of Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, this is still domestic, but it's a sort of equivalent. So then actually the economies are like international economies in terms of industrial location. Then we have thinking of Medan, Kuala Lumpur, this is only 300. So Palembang, Singapore, only 460. So those are the same as Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, or Bangkok, Phnom Penh. So we can do some possibly similar to domestic connection, production connection, one shuttle a day or so. So when we think of Indonesia, certainly the whole Indonesia is huge, as you know, that Bandar Aceh to Merauke, 5,000. This is equivalent to Jakarta, Tokyo, Jakarta, Canberra. And you can see that Madrid, Moscow is much shorter, only 3,000 plus. So this is Indonesia. Then when we think of the location of industries, I think this is one approach that we have to think of. So when we talk about the pattern of international division of labor, here we apply the so-called unbundling concept proposed by Richard Baldwin in his book in 2016. We have industry by industry division of labor, so-called first unbundling, then task by task division of labor, the second unbundling, and then person by person division of labor, the third unbundling. So these are actually overlapped, but by reducing the mobility, reducing the friction of mobility, we are really evolving from first unbundling only while to adding the second unbundling, adding the third unbundling. And then digital economy, digital technology is coming in. Then actually digital technology is affecting all three. So that's one thing that I like to stress on that. So this is just a very brief summary of three kinds of unbundling. First unbundling, this is industry by industry. Then what moves is goods. Then so typical industries are agriculture, fishery, food, processing, mining, labor-intensive industries, tourism, like that. And then we have some decent level of connectivity, institutional and physical connectivity. The second unbundling, this is task by task division of labor. So in case of manufacturing sector, parts and components are traded a lot. Then what moves, in addition to goods, ideas move. Then typical industries are machinery industries and industries in global value chains. And then we have much tighter physical connectivity here. The third unbundling, this is person-wise division of labor. So one task is done by individuals located remotely. Then in addition to the former, data also should be mobile here. And then typical industries, digitalizing services. Then we have much more person-level services-oriented connectivity. So those are three kinds of unbundling. And you can see that digital technology as a game changer coming in here. For the first unbundling, also we can utilize digital technology for problem solving, enhancing productivity, upgrading to the second unbundling sometimes. For the second unbundling, further widening, deepening of international production networks by digital technology. Then for the third unbundling, certainly digital technology is important, but we can explore frontiers of new businesses. So let me talk about the implication of digital technology a little bit more. Actually, the innovation changed the nature very drastically. In 2000 to 2015, we observed a major shift from incremental innovation to disruptive innovation. Incremental innovation is a sort of step-by-step, but continuous improvement is coming. And typically, we need large R&D in a long-run perspective. So in a sense, a low risk, low return. But in a disruptive innovation, particularly with digital technology after 2000, that introduced new goods and services and explore new markets. So low threshold trials and errors are coming in. So high risk, high return. And then digital technology makes disruptive innovation very advantageous. However, from 2015 or so, expansion of internet smartphone subscribers slowed down. So digital businesses started shifting from simplistic matching businesses to activities for upgrading, rejuvenating traditional industries. So that is so we call the digital transformation. So the relationship between technologies and innovation, say we have R&D or something, R&D, then we produce technology. So this is stock of technologies, codified knowledge, ideas. Out of that, a part of it can be utilized in the economy or society. This is called deployment. That is so-called innovation. So in the past, particularly in case of non-digital technology, how to utilize technologies to the economy and society, that kind of deployment was pretty difficult. So innovation capabilities were very, very important. So that is why a large part of innovation was monopolized by developed countries. But digital technologies are different. Some part of digital technology, not all of them, of course, some part of digital technology is relatively easy to deploy. So actually, producing technologies itself is maybe difficult. We need a lot of R&D, but deployment itself is going to be much easier for some part of digital technology. So that's why actually there's room for newly developed and developing countries to do some creative imitation. Some sort of a similar digital services are in developed countries. Then actually developing countries can imitate and localize that kind of services relatively easily. So actually that changes the nature of innovation. So now innovation is pretty much possible in newly developed and developing economies. So we are having advantage of backwardness and the leapfrogging opportunities. So R&D is still important, but the deployment adds more values. So deployment or social implementation itself can be a good business. And also, sometimes the newly developed countries can deploy technology easier than in developed countries, because in the newly developed economies, so there are many incomplete economic systems and institutions. So digital technology can supplement that. And also local deployment of existing business models abroad So creative innovation is possible too. And also many developing countries are having a young population. Those are generating advantages of backwardness, particularly in deployment. So certainly we need an ecosystem for venture businesses, so enabling trials and errors. The possibility of success may be low, but we have to provide opportunities for trials actually. So venture businesses and other financial facilities for high risk, high return, and also technology hubs like incubator centers, co-working spaces, accelerators, universities, others. And human capital is central, and digital infrastructure network is important. R&D stock is of course useful, but the technology deployment links is particularly important. Some countries try to do infant industry protection, but that may not be very effective. So we have to be careful on that. So based on those, I'm thinking of 3 kinds of unbundling. Particularly in the case of Indonesia, what could we do in this new environment? So industry by industry division of labor. So actually most islands in Indonesia are doing that already, say in natural resource-based industries, labor-intensive industries, tourism and others. And also, some people are worrying about the Dutch disease. Wages could be high in terms of sort of labor productivity, even in rural areas. But I think that the wage levels are still pretty internationally competitive. Digital technology can rejuvenate all the industries, enhance productivity, and expand businesses. Particularly communication technology is important in the context of Indonesia, I think. The rural areas in Indonesia are having a lot of problems in the past, particularly with poor physical connectivity, because the distance is far too, actually. But communication technology may improve some part of that by working for marketing, access to information, supply chain management. And also some part of information technology like drones utilized for agriculture, for example, that may coming in. So, and also introduction of just-in-time system may upgrade unbundling to the second unbundling, for example, in the food industry with cold chains or fast fashion garment. Going to the second unbundling, so actually this is led by machinery industries. Time-sensitive production networks are developed in East Asia, Eastern Europe, and Mexico. And actually, other parts of the developing world, this type of division of labor is not there. That is because the requirements, actually, in order to fragment production to tasks, actually, we have to have 2 conditions. One, production cost saving in production blocks, and also the low servicing costs. Particularly the second one, low servicing costs that cannot be met in many developing countries. So East Asia, including ASEAN, is successful in doing that. But if you look at the countryside of Indonesia, still that's a task, that's the issue that we have to solve. And also industrial agglomeration will help local firms participate in global value chains. So we need fragmentation and agglomeration at the same time. Once we have agglomeration, then we can encourage local firms to come into production networks, including multinationals, that would accelerate technology transfer and fostering of entrepreneurs, engineers. So, but if you look at ASEAN, then actually the commitment of ASEAN to Factory Asia is very, very strong. I will show you some figures, particularly in machinery industries. So, and also with COVID-19, some people said that production networks, global value chains may die. But actually, that was not true. Production networks survived COVID-19 very strongly in ASEAN and East Asia. And actually, the relative position of East Asia was even strengthened. And then they look at Indonesia. Indonesia is coming along with automobile industry. Some delays observed in electronics. So if you have to look at differences in characteristics in automobiles and electronics. Automobiles think much of agglomeration compared with fragmentation, but electronics prefer fragmentation more than agglomeration. So both are needed, but the rates are different. And particularly in the case of electronics, air transportation is important. So in order to have electronics, we have to think about those. And also we have now, unfortunately, enhancing geopolitical tensions. In ASEAN, it's not really felt probably strongly, but in G7 countries, now that kind of trend cannot be really negated. So, but actually ASEAN may attract more electronics, particularly in enhancing geopolitical tensions. So, and the last thing, digital technology does not kill the benefit of international division of labor, at least in the short run and the middle run. Some people claim that digital technology, particularly robotics, AI, like that, in factories, say 3D printers, then actually those kind of IT may be substituting labor in developing countries. But actually, it doesn't happen yet. So I will show you some empirical results. So just going through very quickly the fragmentation of production for the second unbundling. We need two conditions, particularly the second one is very important, service link. So now we have task by task division of labor. So the coordination between production blocks is very, very important. That includes the transportation of parts and components and the communication between these two. So that is the key to participate in production networks first. Then actually the production networks consist of short and long distance transactions at the same time. Some transactions is short, particularly usually arm's length. That means inter-firm. Then long distance tend to be intra-firm. So actually the production networks are sharing both at the same time. In the short distance, actually we are having say small, medium enterprises, some are foreign, some are local, and that would generate industrial agglomeration. So actually the production fragmentation and the industrial agglomeration are going at the same time. So particularly the population size is big, the formation of industrial agglomeration is very important. This is a trade matrix. So for machinery trade, so that includes all machines, so including general machinery, electrical machinery, transport equipment, and precision machinery. Then rows are exporters, columns are importers. So this is so-called trade matrix. So the actual figures are in trade values in 2019. And using the same year's data, so we conducted a gravity equation exercise, and including all countries in the world. Then get the so-called predicted values. So after controlling exporters' economic size, importers' economic size, and distance and others, then what could be a sort of a usual level of trade? That is the predicted. So A divided B is say 100. That means that this is the same as the predicted values. above 100, more than actual is more than predicted. Less than that, and then the opposite. So if you look at the ASEAN, so you can see the ratios are all very, very high, way above 100. Say to the world, 247%, import side 192%. So, and also with trading partners, export side and import side, almost all are very, very high. So that indicates that the ASEAN countries are very highly committing to factory Asia in machinery industries. The China's figures, so you see the actual exports are big, yes, but if we look at actual divided by predicted, it's not really, really big compared with ASEAN. So China is big. That is why they are exporting some machines a lot. But the commitment to international production networks may be lower compared with ASEAN. And certainly you like to see what happened in Indonesia. This is for individual ASEAN countries in the same exercise. So Indonesia used to be said that it's very late in coming into production networks in ASEAN and East Asia. So if you look at the world total, Indonesia's exports are only 44%, import side 89. Those are less than 100. But if you look at to ASEAN, exports to ASEAN 132, and then from ASEAN 203 or 3. So if we look at that, so import side, certainly Singapore is huge, but Thailand, Vietnam is also big in proportion. Then export side, Singapore 104, Thailand is big, Philippines, Vietnam are very big. So you see, these are actually the automobile links. If we are going down to the more detailed statistics, so Indonesia is now becoming one of the major countries in automobile networks in ASEAN. That's what we can see that. So still, electronics is slow, but automobiles actually are changing a lot in the past 10 years. So look at COVID-19 situation very briefly. So this is coming from IMF's book. See, goods trade drops, but coming back pretty quickly. Services are going down deeper, services trade, but recovering very slowly. So compared with global financial crisis in 2008, that's a yellow. So recovery was very slow, but this time recovery was pretty quick. And then of course, COVID-19 is not over yet, but we see that relatively quick recovery was observed. So some people claim that global value chains got really fatal damage, but it doesn't happen coming from COVID-19. If we look at region by region export pattern, this is a world total exports, East Asia's exports, North America's exports, Europe's exports for machinery. So we have sharp drops, but coming back around September, October 2020 already. But that trough was much shallower in case of East Asia. But in case of general machinery, electric machinery, actually, that is not very below, lower than the previous year. So we are having positive demand shocks due to stay at home and the remote working too. And then for the introduction of robots, industrial robots, some people claim that the introduction of robots in developed countries may substitute for labor in developing countries. But look at these empirical studies. Actually, the introduction of robots on the developing country side would increase network trade. That was a sort of temporary, sort of tentative results that we got. So for the second unbundling, Jakarta Metropolitan is forming significant industrial agglomeration already. The Surabaya can have another industrial agglomeration. Other parts of Java, southern part of Sumatra may be linked with domestic networks. North and middle parts of Sumatra, including real islands, may become a significant spin-off place from Singapore, Malaysia. The Medan, Makassar, with large population, have a good potential for independent satellites. So I'm running out of time, so just speed it up. The third unbundling, one task, that means one task is completed by individuals located in different countries. So now actually COVID-19 is accelerating digitalizing services, but actually the quantity is still small. But maybe in the future, this is very important. If you look at the nature of digital connectivity compared with the physical connectivity, particularly in the context of rural development in Indonesia, so in case of digital connectivity, distance doesn't matter much. But still, with digital connectivity, geographical stickiness will remain for networks of entrepreneurs and human capital. So probably we need some mediators or matching businesses in order to utilize local human capital. This is a sort of image of the third unbundling. One tax is done by individuals remotely located. So if you check the statistics, this is the growth of exports of computer services. Many countries are having positive growth in 2020. As Indonesia is here, so 28% increase in exports of computer services. So of course, denominator was relatively small. I skip this. So the conclusion, Indonesia is a large islands economy. That is why probably international trade may provide some useful views, particularly on industrial development. And possible game changers are physical connectivity, digital technology, and investment-related policies. By industry division of labor, digital technology can enhance productivity and expand business opportunities. By task division of labor, deeper involvement in production networks, particularly in electronics, is possible. And second-tier cities may participate with public investment. Then the person-by-person division of labor, physical distance matters less, but still agglomeration is important. So in addition to upgrade digital connectivity, fostering startups and raising human capital are the key. The last page is the references. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, audience, you have the chance to ask questions. Please say your name and institution. Great. Well, Budi. Okay. Great.
Let me. Okay.
No.
Okay. All right, Kimura, thank you very much for your presentation. This is Budi from ANU. So you are very optimistic with digitalization and development in developing country. However, literature also show that digitalization has two characters. One is uniting, meaning that those who are able to access the digital technology actually expand, united, and got more information, and what you have mentioned about unbundling is happening. But also it has a characteristic of dividing between those who has access to digitalization and those who are not. And in developing countries, is those who do not have access is big things. And so what are your policy recommendations that actually this digitalization not only have an inner force, for development, but also has an exclusivity force, which actually expanding by itself the coverage of their benefit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Certainly, the digital transformation is a big change. So we have good points, and also we may have some sort of backlash here and there too. So in terms of backlash, say sometimes called the digital divide. One thing is that is really coming from poor physical infrastructure, say digital connectivity. Another is much more like a human capital problem, right? So for digital connectivity, I think particularly thinking of the inclusive growth. So we have to take care of that very seriously, particularly in rural areas. And also human capital issues. I think so in case of Indonesia, the population is relatively young, so that would help. But there's a relatively old people and also less educated people may have some sort of backlash over there. So those are certainly, we have to take care of that as far as possible. But at the same time, for those people too, we may provide some good aspects of digitalization. One is, as I said, actually digital technology is changing virtually all industries and services. So by having a higher productivity and also replacing a sort of labor here and there, actually that would generate more income and more jobs possibly. So actually so replacement of labor may not be a sort of really serious concern in the case of developing countries compared with developed countries, because they are relatively young and also the skill level is not really specific. So actually the changing sort of to better jobs may be easier in developing countries. And also another very important aspect is that the digital connectivity is, we can overcome distance. So in the past, the physical connectivity was very important. Still that's important, but many, say, government services, for example, and also information, matching opportunities, and looking at the market information, those can be done by digital connectivity. So actually, some countries like Cambodia and India, they are utilizing digital ID to provide social services, for example. So I think that kind of good aspects are coming at the same time too. So certainly digital divide is going to be a serious problem, but we don't. But at the same time, we are having many good aspects of digital transformation for poor people too. So I think so we have to utilize those kind of opportunities very aggressively.
Okay, would you like to? Okay. Any other question from this group? Yes, no. Okay. One question.
Thank you, Prof. Chatur. Good to see you again. Thank you, Prof, for your excellent presentation. I learned a lot. This is not my field, but I'm intrigued by your presentation. I would like to ask a question about where should Indonesia heading in terms of the innovation, whether we should pursue the more gradual, incremental innovation or disruptive innovation, and what will be the consequences on the social welfare, on inequality, if we pick, for example, with the disruptive innovation, where we know this is a high risk, a high return, or we should pursue both in the future, considering that the quality of our education is also very low, and the race is going to be very difficult in the future in terms of creating the social cohesion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Certainly, I cannot predict everything, but yeah, so incremental innovation is very expensive. But you still have to do that. But as you see that R&D investment is still pretty small in case of Indonesia. So certainly that should be increased to some extent. But the rate of doing R&D should be shifted to deployment of technology more. Then certainly that disruptive innovation is providing a lot of economic opportunities right now. So and you are having a young population too. So I think Indonesians should not be afraid of step into disruptive innovation. The young entrepreneurs are setting up startups. I think typically more than 90% of startups would fail. And that is just usual. But so once it is failed, then actually so we have to scrap that, and then they have to go to another business immediately. I think that kind of scrap and build is going to be very important in order to use disruptive innovation. So that kind of dynamics should be secured in order to utilize disruptive innovation. So the consequences so of course, so one thing is that not everybody can do that kind of businesses. Then of course we have positive spillovers everywhere too. But maybe you are worrying about some sort of enhancing inequality for a sort of very small number of population. So that is one thing is that we have to have a sort of taxation issue very seriously, rather than penalizing getting richer people, but they have to share some part of the gains to the society. I think the collecting personal income tax system may not be very enough to capture those kind of things, particularly in the case of digital businesses. But I think that should be solved. So rather than stopping those kind of businesses, having some sort of fair shares coming from those kind of people, I think that should be a sort of solution for that. Then education may need to change. I'm an already old university professor. I cannot really teach those kind of things. But one thing is, of course, a very specialized human capital for programmers and others. Those are extremely important, of course, for using AI and others. At least you need, say, 5,000, 50,000 programmers to utilize that. But in addition to that, others are much more a sort of entrepreneurs. That's what we need. So we have a specialized digitalized persons. Then how to utilize those for businesses. I think this is also very important. So that is not really simplistic. Rather than sort of really specializing in computer science, but a sort of wide range of entrepreneurship is going to be very important. So I think there's no shortcut to do those kind of things, but particularly in the case of Indonesia, I think you are having a very active young people a lot. So I think that's a good thing that you can step in over there. Indonesia's people are using smartphones very, very actively. That is a really pretty high, I think, even in the world standard. I think they are really looking at those kind of things. So I think that's a good starting point, how to utilize their talents for new businesses, rather than applying brake for that kind of new businesses. I think that kind of things is going to be very important in the coming years. Those are my views.
Would you like to explore further? Okay, great. We still have 1 more minute. If there's any very short question. No? Okay, I think great. Big applause to Prof. Kimura. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think this all for this session. So I hope you are happy with the talk and happy with the way I run the session. Thank you and see you later. Big applause to the organization and also the audience.
Thank you, Alexander, too. Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
talk. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Professor
likewise,
Chatur.
your talk was very good.
Right. Thank you, Professor Fagian and Professor Kimura, for joining us and providing us an insightful session this afternoon. So to end this session, I would like to remind you, well, let me see how everybody's doing. Are we still in good energy today? Yes, we have 2 more agendas for today, so that's going to still be very exciting. One last parallel session for this afternoon, and I would like to remind you that there will be 3 special sessions in Malimbu 1 room, which is for from AIC about COVID-19, and then Malimbu 2, a special session from LPEM from Faculty of Economics of Universitas Indonesia. And in Medana 2, there will be a special session from AAJI, Asuransi Jiwa, yeah. So please make time to attend those special sessions. And otherwise, enjoy the last session, and we invite you to a very fancy and hopefully refreshing gala dinner tonight at 7 p.m., hosted by our generous sponsor, Bank Indonesia Institute. We would like to also remind you to be able to join the gala dinner tonight. Please wear your participant tags. All right? So thank you very much. We continue our next agenda. Please head to your designated rooms. Thank you very much. Round of applause, please.
As of this morning, there have been 571 cases confirmed by the Chinese government, and 17 people are reported to have died of this new strain of respiratory illness.
Pandemi COVID-19 memberikan pelajaran yang sangat berharga bagi kita. Ketahanan, kesehatan, dan kesiapsiagaan dunia terhadap pandemi ternyata tidak cukup kuat. Jutaan orang yang kehilangan nyawanya, dan perekonomian dunia pun mengalami keterpurukan.
Your attention, please. This room will be separated again, so be sure to bring your valuables with you. And you can join the session in Ballroom 1 and Ballroom 2. Thank you very much.